Good evening. I'm Sarah Laidlaw in Savannah, Georgia. I am a nonprofit accountant who wrote a little program for migrating history, and Ernest asked if I would go over how I migrate from one QuickBooks desktop file to a new desktop file. First of all, I know most of us that work with QuickBooks have probably started a new data file at one point in our career, and it's not fun. I know that's not fun. So tonight what I'd like to do is touch on an overview of the process and things to think about, and I will show you some hints and tips to make the job a little easier. And finally, I will show you two different apps that I use to make the job a little bit quicker. So I'm going to gloss over some of the information that's in my PowerPoint. I'm going to give a copy to Ernest so you can read the dry stuff later. But I wanted to be as detailed as possible. First, I'll go over why we start new data files, then planning and your various options for tackling these projects. When's the best time to migrate a new file? We'll talk about history and deciding what kind of history, or if you need the history. Then the most time-consuming part of these projects is really cleaning up the data and prepping the data for the new file. I'll show you options for creating a new file. There's options for exporting and importing lists, like the chart of accounts and the customers and the vendors. Then I want to spend the most time in exporting monthly history for comparative financial purposes, and then importing that history. And then a couple of hints and tips to finish up the new file. Wrong way. So we've all worked with data files that have become corrupt, or the list limit has been reached. In Pro and Premier, once a list reaches 1450 or near 1450, it's time to start talking about a new data file or another option. Starting and stopping tracking inventory was one reason, because you can't say inventory's been set up one way and we need to change methods. There's no way to do that in an existing file. File size can be one reason. QuickBooks running slowly is one reason I hear a lot. And we found that even upgrading to enterprise, that may not solve the problem. The problem tends to go with you to enterprise. So once we realize that we need a new data file, this is just the F2 product screen. What I'm looking for are the product total names here. I think, is everybody here pro advisors? What kind of audience do I have, Ernest? Is it?
Yep.
Yeah, so a lot of this is this old, we already know about. The biggest advice I can give is do not jump into a project as large as setting up a new file without a very detailed plan. Some files are very simple, some are very involved. You need to really spend some effort into planning out from beginning to end how you're going to do this project. If the client is dealing with list limits, like you've just too many customers, accounts, and everything, you've really have three options. You can upgrade to Enterprise if you're in Pro and Premier. You can condense the file and purge out old history, including old list names, and then get that list back down, or you can start a new file. All the other reasons, you need to start a new file. So I don't know about you, but January is my busiest month. So it's natural to think to start a new data file at the beginning of the year or right at the end of the year. But if you think about my staff, us, their client, January is a rough month to do anything, a big project like this. So, we're busy with W-2s and 1099s and year ends. And so my advice is to start the planning sometime in the fall or when it isn't as busy. and you can create the new data file, import history all the way up to your current month, add the next month, and then have all that done well before the go live date. And then when you make it to year end, drop in that last trial balance, your open items, and take it from there. So try to do a lot of the legwork way before your go live date. The next important thing to think about is the history. You have to make a decision. First of all, do you want your history? Is the data valuable for comparison reporting? If you have a data file where the data needs a lot of work and it's not very valuable for comparative financials, then don't bother with the history. Start fresh. Forget about the comparison financials. Concentrate on the opening trial balance, a clean opening trial balance, clean lists, and deal with your open AP and AR and outstanding banking items and going forward. But if your general ledger is valuable, you have to decide between importing and exporting historical transactions or monthly trial balances. I rarely attempt bringing over complete transactions. It adds a level of complexity. There's linked transactions. There's so many components that if I'm going to go to all the effort to start a new data file, my preference is to have clean lists and bring in just the history that I need for my comparative financials. And that gives me a lot more freedom in redesigning and manipulating the data. So cleaning up the data, that's the hard work. But this is your chance, okay? You may have a chart of accounts that just is out of control. This is your chance, especially if the client is paying you a good amount of money to do this project, is you add value to not just start a new data file, but improve that data file. So I like to work in a copy of the data file. If they are continuing to work in the data file clear up to a start date, you can't do that. You're going to have to work in the actual data file. And of course, single user, and when the client does it, it's out of the file. It's important to work your AR and AP. Make sure that those lists are that data is as clean as possible. Everything's been applied. There isn't any old outstanding bills that have been on there for years. Get it as clean as possible so that you bring across valid open transactions to the new file. So a lot of the work may be cosmetic. The beautiful part about QuickBooks, or scary to some people, is that every list name really has a hidden code underneath it that we don't know about. But that gives us the ability to edit account numbers, edit account names and descriptions, because the code underneath doesn't change. So we're free to edit those fields. And then, of course, if you edit a name, it's going to edit it all back to the beginning of time because it only has the one name. So that can be good or bad. When I'm cleaning up data files, I like having the freedom to make those cosmetic changes that are valuable for management. You can merge accounts together. Say you've got, there's all kinds of things. There's other expenses that need to be in regular expenses, or a current asset is supposed to be a long-term, or insurance has been misspelled for years. I mean, this is your chance to really clean this up. So the consistency of the chart of accounts and the source data and the chart of accounts and the target data is imperative. You have to realize that these journal entries that are coming from one system to the other, every figure has to land in the right place. So be careful when you're planning your chart of accounts, and understand and make sure that the target software actually has the same chart of accounts as your history. Some chart cleanups are a little more complex than others. If you have a simple utilities to utilities, that's a no-brainer, okay? But some clients may have gas and electric and water as sub-accounts that roll up into utilities, but in the new data file, they don't need all that detail. They just want utilities, okay? So rolling those up and merging those into utilities is an easy process. More complex is if you have utilities and they say, oh, I wish it had been broken out by gas, electric, and water. So there's an extra value that you can bill for, is to analyze transactions in the general ledger and determine how to split those up. And then split those up in the target, in the source data before you generate your journal entries. Keep in mind that some a lot of clients don't use account numbers, but part of your discovery is determining if they have auditors, financial auditors, or tax accountants that use that chart of accounts. And if they do, and you do want to renumber the chart, devise a conversion table in Excel to say this account number is now this account number, and that your tax accountant and auditor will thank you next year. Let's see. Okay, so now we've decided we have to start a new file. You have three options. My first option, if possible, is to take a copy of the data file, condense it, and completely purge out every transaction in that file. And what that will leave you with is a shell. So the goal is to salvage as much of that old file as possible. It doesn't always work, but it's worth trying. Okay. The second option is there's a feature when you start a new QuickBooks file to create a new file from existing file. I've been playing with that, I'm not really impressed. And then the third is start a completely brand new file, empty file. The favorite one is the condense and purge option. And the reason I think it's important is, especially if you have a data file with a lot of users, remember that every user has their own toolbar, they have their own preferences, they have memorized reports. Payroll does not convert over, so you've got payroll items, you have employees, all the tax information. It's the plethora of information that is not going to be in the new data file. So if you can salvage that data in a file, try it, okay? Tip, never ever work on data over a network. Take a copy of that data and put it on your fastest computer on a local drive. You need to make sure that you've got the admin user password, because you're going to be working in single user mode. And you will go through utilities to condense the data. One trick that I have is to condense the data twice. First, condense the data to isolate just a couple years worth of activity. Of course, you make these decisions with the owners, okay? How many years do they have to have, okay? So say I save 3 years worth of activity and you tell it to purge all the list names, all the old customers, all the old vendors and accounts that we don't use anymore. Purge those and leave me just a couple years in the data file. Then take that data file and purge all the transactions. So that will leave you a smaller, cleaner group of lists. Creating a new file. This is just how to create a new file and where to go. Oh, and don't give up. I tried one. I'd had a large enterprise file, 10 users. It was a monster. And I tried condensing this file and purging all the information, and it looked like it locked up. And I got this was on a Friday afternoon, and I got really frustrated, and I left it. It just looked frozen. And I take this back, it was on a Saturday. Sunday, I came in, and I was sitting in front of the computer. It had been 15 hours, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. I was sort of doodling when it finished. And it was beautiful. It was a beautiful empty file. So you never know. So maybe one of those things where take a copy of the file, put it on your fastest machine, crank it up, and leave it and see what you get. I have other tips. Let's see. Make sure that when you're done with the data file, do some data management, rebuild it, resort all the lists. It will purge payroll. Remember that ePay and direct deposit is actually a special process within desktop payroll. It will purge the payroll, but it won't purge the current year. So you have to trick it. You have to either wait till January 1st or change your system date and make it think it's next year. There's my little hint. There is a feature to start a file from the existing file. It only gives you the sales tax items, the memorized reports, and the chart of account. It does not do the credit cards and the bank accounts. I don't know. I don't really see the much value in this unless you absolutely cannot purge a file. It would be the second step. When you create a new file, be prepared to answer all the interview questions. Understand your client. When's their year end? Do they charge sales tax? All that fun stuff. It will lead you through setting up a chart of accounts. We don't want a chart of accounts because we're going to import our own. So uncheck everything that's recommended. And go to the chart of accounts after it builds the file and see if you can delete out whatever's left. I don't think it'll let you delete out retained earnings and some others, so leave those be. Go through all the company and admin preferences, get that file set up right. Then, if you're starting an empty file, you're going to have to import all your lists. Export out of the old system, import to the new system. QuickBooks comes with a feature of exporting all the list as an IIF. This is special Intuit format, Intuit interchange format. And you can export all your lists and import them into the new file. You can even open it in Excel. And there's how to do that if you need to make any edits. But don't save it as an Excel if you need to import an IIF. It's a very special format. It also, let's see, hold on. Okay, so there's where you go to export your list. Now be very careful. That IIF is going to export all lists, even including inactive. So that's why it's important to see if you can clean things up before you get to this point. And y'all can read through this later. An IIF file historically has not done any data checking. When you import, you back up first. You import, and if it hoses the file, it hoses the file. Okay, so desktop 19 is supposed to have a new routine where they've improved this. I haven't really played with it, so tread lightly. I did notice some things when I was testing that QuickBooks ignored some of the accounts in my chart of accounts that was coming in from the source data. Open balance equity. And so just be prepared to look for these. My client had it named the same. QuickBooks uses 5-digit general ledger numbers. And I made a note of what my client's general ledger numbers were. So once it imported, I had to go fix some things. So there's a little warning there. We all know that in QuickBooks, some of the accounts on the chart are special system-generated accounts. Accounts receivable requires customers. Accounts payable requires a vendor. Sales tax requires or should have a vendor name on transactions. Things of that nature. So when you're talking about moving history, and I have long journal entries with multiple entries to accounts receivable and accounts payable, it isn't going to work to import into the existing system generated AR and AP accounts. So what we do is we set up at least 3 new accounts in the target data, and we name one I misspelled that. It's accounts receivable history. It's a regular current asset account, accounts payable history, a regular current liability account, and sales tax payable history. And then if your AR is 1100, I'll do 1100B. Okay. So make 3 new accounts. Now you have 2 options. How are we going to get the history out of the old file and into the new file? You can manually compile it, which is what we used to do, where you take the change, and I'll show you. I do have a quick little video. You take the net change on the balance sheet, and you take the P&L, and you cobble it all together, and you do it all by hand in massive Excel spreadsheets. If that's too time-consuming, find a third-party utility, which I happen to have written. TBX is a TBX trial balance exporter has been a lifesaver for me. It is a fast, easy way to get journal entries, and it just takes seconds. So just to y'all understand accounting, change in the balance sheet for July, here's your P&L. You would have to cobble all this together. Here's the tip. Unallocated. Oh, when TBX exports class names, a replacement table will pop up, and you can either accept the original class name as for the export, or you can replace it. So if I have, location 10, I can replace it with 10. I mean, whatever works. But in the replacement table, make sure that unallocated is blank, because unallocated is really unallocated. So this feature is available for migrating to other programs. All right, so I'm going to, how much time do I have? A few more minutes? 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Let's see. Let's hope that this works.
TBX Trial Balance Exporter is the fastest, easiest tool to export balances from QuickBooks Desktop.
If you would like to migrate monthly history out of a QuickBooks Desktop file to a new program or back into another desktop file, it's a lot of work to gather the monthly activity. For instance, this is just the month of July, and you would need the change column from the balance sheet. Then in order to get the P&L accounts, you would pull a P&L by class. There's my 285. This represented on the balance sheet, but you'd cobble together the balance sheet and the P&L, and everywhere that you have a class name, you would have to grab, in this case, all 3 numbers for account 5155 taxes payroll. So it's very time consuming to put this together manually. So what I've done is written a little program called TBX Trial Balance Exporter. Let me show you how quick and easy you can get monthly balances out of QuickBooks with TBX. I'm going to select a journal entry for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2017. And I've already named my comma delimited file, and I'm going to hit, whoop, I skipped a step. I'm going to test my connection. This is a pretty big file, so it may take a few moments, but when it's done compiling the figures, it's going to pop up a text file to give me a quick peek at the data file before I open it in Excel. Done. So now let's see what it looks like in Excel. I've already have one opened up here. And there's my journal entry. I've already widened the columns. There's a one journal entry reference number for each month and one date for each month, and this entire list of data foots to Xero. We have it sorted by account name in case we need to replace some system names. I'll go into that later. But that's it. We're done.
Easy peasy. Okay, so this will all be in the slide deck. First, you'll need a beginning trial balance and some hints on prepping that file, and then of course the monthly history, one file for each year, and how to deal with that. Then how do you import the monthly history into QuickBooks? Well, you can't. QuickBooks doesn't have an import feature for journal entries. So the four most popular programs on the market are Zed and Sazant, Business Importer, and TPI Transaction Pro Importer that was just bought out by Right Networks. They all have a cost. You can import with an IIF, but tread lightly. There is Hector Garcia has some YouTube videos on how to take Excel and create your own IIF. Here's the hint of the day. I was working with TPI last night, and the last time I tested it, it worked. And the new version, they changed the setting. So after spending a couple hours fighting with it, I finally figured out that if you can either import following the account numbers, or you can import following the account names. If you choose the account names, which I usually do because not everybody has account numbers, you have to go into QuickBooks and turn the account numbers off. So here's a screenshot of where that is. So hopefully that saves you a couple hours of headache there. And then the last couple pages are how we set up TPI. I won't get into all that. And the mapping. When we create a map, it creates a .dat file, and you can find that saved file by clicking on Load Map. So you only have to do this once. And then when after everything's loaded, you deal with accounts receivable, open items, accounts payable. It will zero out the temporary account if you do it properly. I recommend setting up one new item name called opening balances to set up your open invoices and credit memos and have that point to your temporary account. Bank reconciliation purposes, you need to deal with the bank account. I usually journal the balance out to a temporary account, and then bring in journal back in the cleared balance from the bank and all the outstanding checks so that my bank rec works moving forward. Be very careful. Don't date things out of the current month or you will start messing up your journal ledger. So those are just some hints to finish up the file. And if you need any help, my information's in the slide deck. Ernest is a pro at TPI and QuickBooks, and he could be some great help too. So,
what else did you learn about TPI and importing while you were doing this?
I'm having difficulty with it reading all the account names. I've got a call into support, and I will update this slide deck when I find out what the answer is. So they've changed some of the coding, and it appears that it doesn't like symbols, characters in your general ledger account names. So comma, slashes, and our chart of accounts are full of these special characters. So I'd like to find out what their solution is.
As they're trying to do the import, they'll strip out all the special characters, so it looks like the names are all the same.
Mm-hmm.
They'll just strip them out, and then they'll try to compare back to the chart of accounts with like the comma in there, and it won't match.
Right.
Nightmare. Yeah, that's why I called it out, because I mean that alone can save you hours, because you're like, why isn't this
Right.
account coming in?
Right. So I'll do
All
the
the special characters.
the legwork for you. You know, I'm going to get with a couple other accountants that use these other tools and find out how they work. And I'm working up a blog post on the different ways to get data into desktop and QBO. I mean, this whole process works for migrating to QBO too.